I know two parents who have an 11-year-old boy, James. I've spent a little time with him in person, throwing a ball around outside and other stuff. And I found him to be sweet, affectionate, sensitive. But when his parents enter the room where he is, everything changes. For one thing, they correct almost everything he says. James told me, for example, that he walked 2 miles to school. It was just a conversation between me and the kid. And immediately his father said, it's maybe a mile at most. James told me that in a recent baseball game, he hit 2 home runs. And his mother said, no, you didn't. You scored 2 runs, but they weren't home runs. Most people, including kids, do not enjoy being corrected, especially when the corrections don't matter. It becomes just humiliation. Despite being corrected often, James still retains the energy and desire for connection that a young boy would. He wants to be seen and heard and acknowledged. So sometimes he talks a lot. He wants to connect and he speaks without paying attention to whether other people are talking. That's what 11-year-old boys do. When he interrupts, his parents, though, scowl at him and angrily tell him not just that he made a mistake, but that he's annoying and rude. Somewhat ironic, considering that his mother does the same thing all day. I'm guessing that during the times that I've been with the 3 of them, about 8 out of every 10 sentences that he heard from them were critical or controlling. And that's with me in the room. Things like, you talk too much. Stop asking questions. Stop doing that. You're being too loud. Slow down. Hurry up. Be careful. Did you ask if you could... You get in the feel? He was being machine gunned with these phrases. Now, if a social worker were evaluating the home, how would the report read? Would there be any mention of James being mistreated or neglected? Of course not. This home would pass a child services examination with ease. It would get an A+, in fact, and yet James is abused every day. Not exaggerating, and I'm not being dramatic. This average child in a good home is an obvious victim of child abuse. And again, I'm not saying this for dramatic effect. This child is being injured. All you have to do is look at his face, and you can see the wounds. He just shrivels inside when his parents talk to him like that. Nobody notices, especially his parents. It is one of the great tragedies of the modern world that enabling and bribing a child with stuff, free time, screens, clothes, whatever, now passes for good parenting. While a parent who is serious about loving and teaching can be considered too harsh. Truly loving parents do not give a child everything he wants. Wrong. Truly loving parents love their child and teach him how to be loving and responsible, because that's what leads to happiness. Sometimes that teaching from a loving parent involves imposing consequences, which increasingly are viewed with great suspicion in this society by the enablers, of course. Parents who take their child's phone, for example, as a consequence, are labeled on social media. This isn't a guess. I've seen these posts. They're labeled as cruel monsters, not just by other kids, but by the parents. They're labeled as villains of the worst kind. The seduction of enabling kids is a complex social and political trick that causes us to neglect the unconditional love a child really needs. James, the child I've been talking about, had all the conveniences that most children have at his age. Phone, video games, social media, all of it. But he was miserable around the constant criticism and controlling of his parents. This is a child of the generation that has now been proven by unnumbered statistical surveys, studies, to be more depressed, suicidal, anxious, disengaged, and unhappy than all of the generations ever recorded before this one. They don't know how to make decisions, on average, not as well, or create relationships. They are overall alone and afraid. And if you talk to people from Generation Z, they describe themselves in those terms. Afraid, fearful, don't have friends, alone, disconnected. If we knew that all these characteristics were due to some chemical in the water, lead, we'd be up in arms. We've seen that. Find increased levels of lead and they shut the city down. Laws are passed. Government agencies are recruited to eliminate this dire, horrible, life-threatening problem. But there is no such chemical involved here. And without an easily labeled cause, something that we can measure with a chemistry beaker, nobody's doing anything to identify the cause even, not even to see it, or much less solve the problem. That's actually not quite right. There are some social scientists now who have statistically proven that our children's deteriorating mental health is directly linked to at least one thing. They don't get the overall picture, but they have identified one problem that has exploded virtually out of nowhere since about 2012. So we're talking very recent history, like seconds in the overall history of mankind. What they've identified as a problem is smartphones, along with the social media, video games, and porn that are sold on those phones. Not to mention upcoming gambling and many more problems. For years, there was not enough strong evidence to say that. But now there is. It is the phones that are a cause of mental illness that's just exploding in kids. Recently, for example, today, I read an article where they've finally indicated that they've exploded the myth that middle-aged men kill themselves more than any other group. That's been true for as long as we kept records. And now they're being beaten out by the upcoming young adults who are addicted to phones. If phones were a good thing, the suicide rate would not be rising. Like, duh, that doesn't take a statistical study. But now they're demonstrating that the suicide rate of the young people is exceeding every other group. It's the phones, at least one cause. And yet not only do we do nothing about that, we parents provide the phones to our kids. We, the parents, are putting the chemical in the water that's killing them. You would think we would be up in arms about that, but we're not, because we're the culprits. We don't want to look at our own behavior. To abuse a child simply means to mistreat a child as a pattern. And we all agree that child abuse is perhaps the most heinous crime, since it can negatively impact in a powerful way the choices and happiness of the affected child for a lifetime. But we're failing to address the most common form of child abuse, which is simply the lack of unconditional love and guidance that every child needs. Instead of focusing on the real problem, we focus on the exotic and more exciting, I hate to say that word, but it's true. We focus on the more exciting, newsworthy forms of abuse, like child porn or trafficking, which damage far fewer children than the simple lack of loving and teaching seen in my description earlier of James. This common form of child abuse is so widespread, we don't even notice it. James, for example, has 2 parents, a home, adequate food and shelter, pretty much every form of entertainment that money could buy. What could be the problem? You could even watch James's parents and think that it's sweet that they pay him so much attention. Child abuse? Ridiculous. But if you are really observant, you see that the light in this 11-year-old boy's eyes is fading. I can see the difference in his eyes between when I'm playing with him and listening to every word he says and not interrupting him and reinforcing what he says, and when his parents simply walk in the room It's like turning a dimmer switch on a light. He almost vanishes. He's losing his creativity and ability to experience unbridled joy. In fact, it's nearly extinguished. And yet, nobody's ever hit him. He's never missed a meal. He's never seen war, racism, or kidnapping. All forms of trauma that are traditionally blamed as forms of child abuse. Yes, children need physical safety, for sure. They need food and water. But no less important is unconditional love. No less. And the mere lack of it is like the absence of air to a drowning person. You don't have to hit a child to snuff out his joy. Just fail to love him. And James heard, "I don't love you," all day, every day. Still does. He hears it with every critical comment, every correction, with the tones of voice that vary between irritation and simple dismissal. He hears it with the absence of deep, connecting gazes. That's what children need. He's not hearing those or seeing them. He's being killed with the lack of warm and tender touch, and with each moment where nobody cares what he thinks. The focus on him. He's being destroyed. I'm watching it. If there is a hint of hitting or sexually abusing a child, we go crazy. We erupt in indignation, which is proper response, but we have to pay attention way sooner than that, and with much greater sensitivity. We must learn how to unconditionally love our children and begin to breathe life into their souls before they are lost to the pain of darkness. You can learn how to love and teach your children in the ways that they need at realloveparents.com.